Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fuliba Thibault. It's some of the worst violence South Africa has seen since the end of apartheid in the 1990s. There have been days of protests, looting and rioting across the country. Although it was sparked by the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma, the crisis has exposed the deeper issues of poverty and inequality. Angry crowds have looted shops, burnt down businesses and disrupted supply chains. There fears now some areas could run out of food as a result. At least 72 people have been killed and hundreds arrested in nearly a week of unrest. We'll bring in our guests in just a moment, but first, this update from Famida Miller in Johannesburg.
This is Alexandra Township in the north of Johannesburg, where we've seen significant looting and rioting over the past few days, specifically down this road where businesses were looted. Many of the buildings here were set alight. There has been a significant police presence, but really not enough to stop these incidents of looting. The army has been deployed. We don't see them here today, but it's thought that perhaps soldiers on the ground has managed to calm the situation, at least to some extent. And just behind us, we're seeing business owners and community members now returning here to try and assess the damage, also potentially clean up and try to restore some sort of calm. But really, it's too late, and the government is facing a lot of criticism for acting too late. Many South Africans, many organizations saying more should have been done early on, especially given that there were warnings immediately during and after the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma. Now, it's his arrest and imprisonment that sparked some of the riots we saw specifically in KwaZulu-Natal. They've now spread to the province of Gauteng. And while it was that incident that might have sparked the riots, that's now morphed into more than just the political situation and the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma. We are seeing rioting and looting specifically linked to the economic situation in South Africa, where people here say COVID-19 lockdowns have left them desperate. They've lost jobs, they can't get jobs, and this is why we've seen businesses looted. People are desperate, and there are concerns around this increasing socio-economic challenges that the government is facing. And while the deployment of soldiers and police might quell protests for now, there's greater concern that if those challenges aren't adequately addressed and resolved, South Africa may continue to see similar uprisings and unrest. Famida Miller for Inside Story, Johannesburg.
Well, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has deployed the military to support local police. He's blamed the unrest on criminals and called on people to stand against the violence.
Although these may be opportunistic acts of looting driven by hardship and poverty, the poor and the marginalized bear the ultimate brunt of the destruction that is currently underway. As I said, shops have been looted and infrastructure has been destroyed. This means that our sick cannot get medication from pharmacies. Food does not reach supermarket shelves, and health workers cannot go to work.
Now let's take a listen to what some South Africans had to say.
Why? What have we done? Just explain to me why. Cyril Ramaphosa, with his processing that takes forever, he's way too slow to act. He's way too slow to act because he's busy processing. This is not the time to process. This is the time to act. You cannot say, we don't condone. We condemn. And you stop there.
I'm a black-owned business and I have managed to create employment at least for 4 people. Now what is going to happen to all those people that were working here? I mean, it's not fair. We know the rate of unemployment is very high, but when we do things like this, then it becomes more higher.
We knew when we locked down again, this was bound to happen, because the longer you leave the people hungry, this events would take place. And I don't think it's only about the whole economy and what's happening on there. I think people are genuinely hungry and they need some type of income. I won't even say income, I'll just say food.
Well, let's bring in our guests for today's Inside Story. In Cape Town, Bongani Mbindwane, a member of the African National Congress and a former National Security Advisor to the Police Minister in South Africa. In Johannesburg, Floyd Shivambu, Deputy President of the Economic Freedom Fighters Party and a Member of Parliament. And also in Cape Town, Tim Murithi, a Professor of African Studies at the University of Free State and Head of Program at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Thank you for being with us on Inside Story. Floyd, if I can start with you in Johannesburg. What is the cause of the unrest in South Africa today and who is responsible for it?
Now, look, just to give you some background, first I want to say greetings to your viewers and to yourself. The background is that for the longest time, we have had an ANC government since 1994, for the past 27 years, which has been presiding over a government which has been incapable to erode the economic apartheid. So you know that apartheid ended officially and formally in 1994, but economic apartheid is still a reality here in South Africa. That is why ourselves as the EFF were founded in 2013 as an organization which was fighting now for economic emancipation. And we were always holding the sitting ANC government accountable. We specifically held President Zuma accountable. We pushed and fought against his corruption and wrongdoing when he was in government. And later on, he was recalled as the President of the Republic. And then a state capture commission of inquiry was established to investigate corruption under his presidency. And that was based on an allegation that 500 billion rands was stolen. That is just about 35 billion US dollars. And when the commission of inquiry was established, we as the EFF, under the leadership of Commander-in-Chief Julius Malema, we went to persuade President Zuma to appear before the commission of inquiry. He refused on the basis that he doesn't want to appear before a judge whom he perceived to be biased, or to be conflicted because of a personal relationship from some time back.
Right.
And then the Constitutional Court did something unusual. They departed from the normal procedures and laws and then gave him a custodial sentence of 15 months. And that sparked the protests that we are witnessing in South Africa. And the nature of the protest is not unusual.
Right.
The slight difference is that it's not now the public institutions like schools and libraries and municipal offices that normally get banned whenever there's protest. Now it's malls that are being looted, it's factories, it's warehouses.
We have seen that, Floyd. We have seen that. The pictures have been quite surprising, and really for people who live out of South Africa to see such scenes out of South Africa is quite surprising and really unsettling. Now, the EFF, Floyd, your party and its leader, Julius Malema, have been accused of fueling some of the unrest and the looting. What do you respond to that?
No, the EFF is not involved in the protest. We have not said anything. We have never said that there must be protest. What we objected to was the usage of the soldiers, because we understand that the soldiers must only be brought in when there's external threats, not for internal civilian matters that can be handled by the police.
But the police clearly showed that they couldn't handle the situation in the last few days. They were overwhelmed. They were caught off guard.
There's not yet been an exhaustive method and mechanism to utilize the police force. So only the police in the provinces that were affected were the ones who were responsible in response. There was never yet a deployment of police force from other provinces to come and reinforce in the areas that were affected. So then to rush for soldiers is now a declaration of war against protesters whose protest in some instances can be understood within South Africa's levels of poverty and high levels of youth unemployment and the joblessness that generally defines society, and also the incapacity of the ANC government to respond much more effectively.
Let's bring in Bongani and hear his thoughts about this, Floyd. Let's bring in Bongani in Cape Town. Bongani, what do you think are the reasons for this violence that South Africa is witnessing today? President Ramaphosa earlier this week described it as ethnic mobilization, which a lot of people criticized him for, saying that he was adding fuel to the fire. What do you make of this, and what do you think are the root causes of this unrest in South Africa?
Well, thank you very much. I think first, it's important to just make it clear that this issue indeed was sparked or triggered by the Constitutional Court's judgment against former President Zuma. However, to characterize what is going on as protests may not necessarily be accurate. A protest, people get together, even if it's not organized. There are placards or some chanting, they are marching, and you see it. Here you have a group of individuals who are storming shopping malls and other commercial areas. Those are not protests. These are what, as President Ramaphosa has characterized, opportunity crimes. However, the trigger has to be explained further, as Floyd has alluded. We can't run away from the fact that there are problems with the economy in South Africa. The issues of unemployment, wealth inequality, and all the related issues, poverty and hunger. Of course, it's not a new phenomenon. I mean, I was here at Jazeera some time being interviewed on the matter of what was then termed xenophobic attacks. They get sporadic, there's contagion, they can spread very fast. Again, the actual issue here is that we have to confront our inequality and joblessness, especially amongst the youth.
Indeed.
So the president's statement, in effect, dealt with that. As far as the ethnicity issues, I think perhaps those were earlier assessments, which I think anyone who is worth an analyst worth any salt will say that at this point that assessment has shown not to be accurate. It's certainly not ethnicity.
Okay, Tim Murithi, Bongani, I think, is right in saying that we haven't seen protests per se as we have in the past, with placards and political chants and so on. This hasn't been the case this year. What is happening right now in South Africa? Is this a political problem or is it an economic problem?
Well, in fact, there are multiple dimensions to the story. So there isn't necessarily one side that is, absolutely correct or accurate. South Africa, since independence, has been experiencing protests on quite a regular basis. In fact, some refer to South Africa as the protest capital of the world, particularly around service delivery. So this is nothing new. What is new is the scale and the scope and the reach of the protests, which has spread across 2 provinces at least, and potentially more going forward. So that is really the crux of the matter. There are different dimensions to this. And at the core of it, though, I would say both Floyd and Bongani have got the right analysis. There's a social economic inequality that can be traced quite far back to the legacy of apartheid and racialized exclusion. And the inability, I would put it bluntly, of the governing party, the ANC, to in fact turn around the situation in the 27 years of its governance, but worse still, the Zuma years that were technically lost And in fact, we saw a regressive.
But Tim, you talk about the legacy of apartheid. I'm apologizing for interrupting you here. You talk about the legacy of apartheid. To what extent, though, I mean, does the legacy of apartheid play into this? As you say yourself, the African National Congress has been in power in South Africa for 30 years, and they came with those promises of addressing poverty and inequality, which they haven't done. Apartheid ended 30 years ago. Why is it that 30 years on, we're still talking about this today?
Well, apartheid did end in 1994, technically speaking. But in fact, if you come to South Africa, you will see that spatial apartheid is very much alive and well. Privatization of housing, privatization of healthcare, education, infrastructure access is very much alive. So the inability to undo the structural inequality that was put in place by apartheid rests firmly in the hands of government, to be frank. The society, the wider society, though, also has a responsibility to, in fact, push, monitor, and ensure that the changes that are necessary to restore the human dignity of the people who are now looting, in the malls, in the shops, in the warehouses, in fact, was achieved. But this is still very much a work in progress. But the sense of isolation is what has led to this deprivation that we are seeing now spilling out on the streets. And this is not an excuse for criminality. But I think if we take a very clinical, militarized police approach to this issue, we will fail to understand the underlying socio-economic drivers and the psychosocial and traumatic dimensions of what is actually causing the social unrest and the uprising that we see at the moment in South Africa. And that would be an incomplete analysis,
right,
and would lead to an incomplete prognosis.
OK, well, let's have a closer look, if we can, at the underlying grievances in South Africa. Many still live in poverty and suffer from inequality decades after the end of apartheid, as you've heard. The World Bank says the richest 20% control nearly 70% of all resources. Unemployment is at a record high of 32.6%, and it's more than 46% among young people. Inflation hit a 30-month high in May, and prices of goods are soaring, while the government has said $35 billion was looted from state funds during Jacob Zuma's 9-year presidency. And coronavirus restrictions have worsened long-standing economic problems, while South Africa faces a resurgence in infections fueled by the Delta variant. Floyd, so we know that there are underlying issues, of course. How does the South African government address this today?
Look, the fact of the matter is that the post-1994 government has not disrupted the economic power relations that defined apartheid. So we are living in a new apartheid state where those that controlled wealth and had access to riches prior 1994 continue to have that power. So that 20% which the World Bank is referring to is possibly constituted of 90, if not 95% white people who were privileged because of the apartheid policies that did not regard black people as human beings, just as extensions of factories and as workers in the mines without meaningful rights. So the biggest problem is that there's not yet been disruption of the economic power relations, particularly in terms of ownership of the land, in terms of the equal distribution of the economy. So that is at the center of the crisis. And also you've got an incapable and corrupt state that always speaks rhetoric and is always engaged in PR exercises that they are fighting coronavirus, they are going to provide jobs, they're going to do this, and none of that is happening. That is where the crisis is happening. But one issue which I think must have to clarify is that protests always take different forms in South Africa.
Right.
Every time they protest in South Africa, government will always characterize it as criminals. Whether it's a protest for service delivery or xenophobic attacks or protest for demarcation of municipalities, it has always taken this form. It's not just that when protesters must protest, they must go and read a textbook of what is a definition of protests, and then they must print placards.
Floyd,
and
let's
so on
hear
and so
from
forth.
Bongani on this.
Protests always take different forms, and the form it has taken now is what has characterized protests in South Africa.
Floyd, let's hear from Bongani. Bongani, Floyd pointing clearly the finger of blame at the government and the African National Congress Party. And today what a lot of people are asking is why the ANC hasn't been able to fulfill the promises it made at the end of the apartheid era to address these issues of inequality and poverty. Why hasn't it been able to do so?
Well, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the ANC, of course. I'm invited as an analyst. I think what is important is to tell the truth. That's the first point of departure. So I agree with Floyd to a large extent that we have poverty issues, we have wealth inequality issues and so forth. And we do need to have a situation where we have a different look and a different way in which we manage our economy. We have currently, we're under quarantine. We have levels from 1 to 5. At this point, we are at level 4, which is in the severity of the issue. So the operations, the factories and so forth are not all fully functioning in South Africa as a result of the Delta variant, of course, which many countries are going through. Now, with that, you have unemployment, as I've mentioned before, especially of the youth.
We've heard about the issues, Bongani. What are the solutions? What are the solutions?
Well, immediately we have to look carefully at how the economy is being currently managed. We can't hide from that. Is it correct to have this serious austerity program and structural adjustment that we have from our finance ministry? Is it correct? Does it exacerbate the issues or not? Shouldn't we have the government being the top tier investor at this stage when the private sector is sluggish? Right. I think perhaps we should look at that very urgently. And the president did allude to the fact that we are going to look at certain issues, and those are part of the issues that are going to be looked at. But if very, very importantly, that very same issue I'm mentioning has really made South African police naked insofar as its budget is concerned.
Okay.
There are no helicopters. There isn't enough equipment. South African police do not have, for instance, enough riot gear and so forth.
It did take a long time for the police to get the situation under control. Let me give the last word to Tim Murithi in Cape Town. Tim, looking from the outside, South Africa is, of course, a role model for the African continent, for emerging nations also. And it's quite unsettling to see what's happening there today. What do you think needs to change? We've heard from President Ramaphosa. His tone hasn't been a conciliatory one so far. What is he going to have to say and do to calm the situation?
Yes, indeed. Even President Ramaphosa himself has acknowledged the failures of the ANC. So this is not an ANC bashing kind of intervention that we're having here. The point is, it is a watershed moment for the country. The social unrest is symptomatic. It really is a symptom. It's not really the underlying cause, which suggests that the government has to, in fact, turn its eyes much more introspectively towards the fact that there are certain socio-economic issues that really remain unaddressed when people live in squalor and others live in relative affluence. You are creating a situation of tension and crisis. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of dialoguing to find out, in fact, what are some of the primary demands, but we've known them for a while. For example, the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation publishes the South African Reconciliation Barometer that tells you for the last 10 years that there's been demands from particularly those in the lower income groups that the equality within society has to be addressed as a matter of urgency. And that means government resources, the amounts that are being dedicated perhaps to the military and to defense, needs to be allocated to social programs, housing, healthcare, education, infrastructure, access to telecommunications, and so on. In the absence of that, you won't have effective peace building and sustainable society going forward.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for a very interesting discussion. Bongani Bindwani, Floyd Shivambu, and Tim Murithi. Thank you all for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you for watching. You can watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the